although it's been with us for thousands, with our species, the human race, for thousands of years. What we have learned about the virus in the last 20 years that we've been studying it, and others, in CFS, is that it can definitely infect cells of the brain when those cells are in the test tube, that it can cause seizures in children, and indeed is the most common cause of seizures in very small children, that it persists in the brain, the CNS, for years after primary infection, maybe forever, that it causes encephalitis not just in kids but in older people, and people whose immune systems are suppressed, and people whose immune systems are perfectly fine, that it causes demyelination, a condition that's seen, for example, in multiple sclerosis, in both infants and children who are immunosuppressed or whose immune systems are fine, that it is associated with multiple sclerosis, and in the last few years that it is associated with temporal lobe seizure disorders. Now that's interesting because I've told you earlier that in chronic fatigue syndrome there are MRI abnormalities in the white matter of the brain, just as there are with multiple sclerosis. I've told you that there are brainwave abnormalities, just as there are in people with seizures. But those abnormalities are different. So it doesn't mean that there's any link between CFS and demyelinating diseases like multiple sclerosis or temporal lobe seizures, but it suggests that there could be, and that this infectious agent could be the explanation linking the two in those people who have those abnormalities. Next slide. The studies of active infection with this virus in CFS that show a positive association in the left here, I wish my pointer were working, are many more numerous, the studies, than the studies, the smaller number that don't show an association, and the number of patients in the studies that show the virus is associated with CFS are nearly tenfold higher than the number of patients in the studies where no association is seen. So there is a link, I believe, between this virus and some cases of CFS. Whether that means the virus causes CFS remains to be shown. Next slide. What about the latest kid on the block, XMRV? This virus was reported to be associated with chronic fatigue syndrome last October in the publication in the journal Science, a very prestigious journal. And in order to get published, the scientists involved had to do a lot of extra studies to really make a persuasive case to the reviewers of the article. This is a picture of the virus. It's a retrovirus. Where you see on the left budding retrovirus is the virus leaving a cell that it's infected, and on the right you see the virus outside the cell going on, thank you, to infect other cells. Good. Next slide. So what did they say in this study? It was pretty impressive. They said they found the nucleic acid, the RNA of this virus, or the DNA of the virus after it enters the human genes, in 67% of patients compared with only 4% of healthy control subjects. They said they found the protein of the virus in 63% of patients compared with none of the healthy control subjects. They said they found this virus not in cells but freely floating in the plasma of 83, the plasma, the blood, which is a combination of fluid and cells. They found it in the cells, but they also found it floating freely in the liquid of the blood, not in the cells, in 83% of the small number of patients they tested versus none of the controls. And they found that the patients with the illness were making antibodies to this virus in 50% of the small number of patients versus none of the healthy controls who were tested. So that's a reasonably impressive set of numbers, but there are many. It is not a perfect study, as the authors of the study would admit. In a perfect study, you would, for one thing, like all of these tests to have been done on all of the patients, and as you see, most of these tests, 3 of them were done on much smaller numbers of patients and of healthy control subjects. And there are other things that make it less than a perfect study, but as someone who has never published a perfect study, I'm sympathetic with that. But the question is, could other groups around the world repeat these results? Well, other groups actually haven't even tried, at least published yet, having tried to look at 3 of these 4 things that the first group did. They have only tried to repeat this part. And 3 groups have found that they are unable to confirm these results. So there is a sort of provisional judgment right now among many infectious disease experts that maybe there was just something wrong with this study and maybe it wasn't right. I will give you my judgment, which is that as I read the 3 papers that have failed to confirm this result, although they were done by very skilled people and were solid work in many respects, there is one problem with all of them that could have undermined their ability to find what they were looking for. So it is my judgment that the dust has not yet settled on this controversy, and I would say we still don't know if this retrovirus is associated with CFS. But I don't believe we can now dismiss that at all. Next slide. What if it were shown by other groups that this virus is associated with CFS? That would be a very important finding, but it would just lead to more questions. For example, is the virus real? Well, yes, we already know the virus is real. Is it associated with this illness? As I've said, that remains to be confirmed. Is it associated with the illness in as many people, 67%, as was reported in October? That remains to be confirmed. And is it a cause of CFS? That remains to be confirmed. But what if it turns out to be associated? Next slide. It could mean 2 things. The simplest thing it could mean is that the virus actually is